I'm sitting in a chair as I record this. Good day, audio listeners. My name is Fago, and welcome back to an album review. Today's subject, Tears for Fears, Songs from the Big Chair. Tears for Fears. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? This album right here is by far the most popular album that I've reviewed so far. And if you somehow don't know Tears for Fears, they are a new wave pop band from England. They are amongst the most popular bands from the 1980s, with two of their most popular songs coming from this record right here. If you may not know new wave, to summarize it, new wave is like pop rock in the 1980s, but with a bunch of pop-oriented styles. At the time of this album's release, Tears for Fears was a four-man band. There was Kurt Smith on bass and vocals, Roland Orzabal, who also did vocals but he did guitar instead, Manny Elias was the drummer, and Ian Stanley was the pianist. And prior to this album, Tears for Fears released their 1983 debut album called The Hurting. It was a big commercial success, and a lot of retrospective reviews have acclaimed it too. The biggest single from The Hurting was Mad World, and you probably know that song based on the cover by Gary Jules and Michael Andrews. So 2 years later, we are now in 1985, and we have this record right here. And I'm going to start off with the two songs that everybody knows. The biggest single from this album was, of course, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. And more than 40 years later, this album is still very popular amongst all generations. For starters, you have the drums that are very groovy. The hi-hat is in like a 6/4 type shuffle style, which I like a lot. The drum fills are very creative too. They're pretty difficult for the average drummer. And of course, the song's foundation would be the guitars. The guitar solo is also very nice at the end of the song. The strums, the riffs, everything also included, it works well to make it very catchy. What I also do like is how the bass stays in the background and it keeps the groove going when the guitar strums are fading out. It takes away any kind of emptiness that might occur. The second single, of course, is Head Over Heels, which probably if you were to play the chorus, everybody would immediately recognize that song. The keys are very different. There's a lot of strong reverb on them and they don't sound like a typical grand piano. I love the way they're mixed, and if you listen closely, there's a little bit of an appoggiatura in the beginning of the song in the background that also works really well. After the first chorus, there's a use of padding that I also like because it doesn't just drop the song entirely, it has like a little bit of a road that goes into it, like a smooth transition. Also, when the drum solo comes in, there's like a big wave noise that happens. I like that a lot too. And also, this song has been so relatable for a lot of people because the chorus says, "Something happens and I'm head over heels," meaning something as simple as a conversation or someone just doing a nice deed can just trigger a bunch of emotions about love and marriage. Now, if you know this album decently well, you would probably know that there's a third popular song called Shout. Now, Shout is an interesting song because it sounds really groovy and catchy, but its content is dark. It talks about child abuse and letting all of your emotions out. And also what's kind of interesting is that the chorus is very repetitive, but the instrumentals are so dynamic and complex that you can hardly even notice that. It keeps the listener attached, and the dynamics and the builds are also really nice. Now, I will say it's not on the level of Head Over Heels or Everybody Wants to Rule the World, but it's still a good song. It feels like this song was meant for Roland because he had a very troubling childhood past with his abusive father. Now, one song that's incredibly underrated is Mother's Talk, because I'm going to skip right to the end and just tell you, the bass at the end of the song for the last 80 seconds is out of this world. Because Kurt shreds the absolute crap out of this bass. It's a bass performance that you would expect from Les Claypool or Victor Wooten. So what happens before those 80 seconds? What happens in the song before the bass solo? I will say Manny on drums does a really creative and good job with how all over the place he is, because his performance, while maybe not as difficult as Everybody Wants to Rule the World, you wouldn't expect it because you get a lot of tom fills, you get a lot of hi-hat fills, and not to mention, the hits are really good too. I also think that the vocals on this song are really catchy also. In the chorus, the vocals go, "We can work it out." I do like how that's kind of emphasized too. Now, a song that's very difficult for me is Broken, because Broken feels like an interlude heading into Head Over Heels. Because it does take a while for the lyrics to enter, and I'm not gonna lie, the instrumental before then is kind of forgettable. Even though it is somewhat catchy and the Head Over Heels riff is actually in this song, there's something in this song that makes me say, wow, this song is really good. There's also not that many lyrics too. Not that it matters, because we'll talk about that later on. The second slowest song is over 4 minutes long, while this song is under 3 minutes. It's a very quick song. Like I said, I do feel like it was an interlude to Head Over Heels. Now, one of my favorite songs on this album is The Working Hour, because we get the saxophone solo that dwells for the entire song. And Manny on percussion does everything. He does different tom grooves, he does different hi-hat grooves, he does a snare groove, he does everything. He was definitely recorded many times during the song's processing. It's a huge difference between that and Broken because The Working Hour also has a long intro, but there's a build. There's a lot of variety, and the saxophone sounds amazing. Because while the saxophone leads the intro, everything else is building behind it. The vocal melodies are really great, and I love the chorus when he says, "This is the working hour." I like that a lot too. It kind of talks about how this is like the working hour, this is the time for us to work on our craft, work on the projects that we want to do in order to find success. And while every song so far has been very poppy, there's one song that's very quiet and somewhat disturbing. It's called I Believe. And I Believe is optimistic, but it's very disturbing and sad at the same time. The song is very similar to Shout. It addresses childhood trauma, but in a very atmospheric and disturbing way. It's very simple instrumental-wise. There's drums, there's piano, and sometimes it's just drums, and sometimes it's literally just vocals with a ton of reverb on it. It's one of those late night drive songs. There's no outlier in this song, but the instrumental really matches the mood. And I do appreciate how sentimental this song feels. It sounds like behind the lyrics there's a child that's very devastated by what's happening, but he or she has very strong faith and confidence in the future. Now, we went over every single song, but there's one last track on this album. It's called Listen. And Listen speaks for itself because it's a nearly 7-minute long instrumental closer. And it's weird because who would close an album with an instrumental? But I gotta say, it sounds amazing. It's one of the best instrumentals I've ever heard in my entire life. Because let me tell you, the entire song, it's an entire build, it's an entire uphill until the final part. The enormous amount of creative thought that was put in the song, it's crazy to me that something like this was made in 1985. It's an entire gradual piece. It's an experience that I can't describe entirely. You would just have to listen for yourself. And it really shows that you don't need lyrics to make a masterpiece like this. Something you probably knew already is that this album only has 7 songs, plus the instrumental. It's by far the shortest album we've done on the channel so far, but that didn't matter because when this album was released, it catapulted Tears for Fears into insane success. To this day, people still love to listen to Everybody Wants to Rule the World and Head Over Heels. Even Shout gets a lot of attention. And the best part of this album is that there's so much more. There's Mother's Talk, there's The Working Hour. The entire album is definitely a great experience to listen to. Amazing variety of instruments, great poppy lyrics. It's got a lot. Not much to say about this album after that. And my score for this album is going to be an 81. If you like this review, hated it, if you want me to review something else, let me know down below. Until then, good night and God bless.